me about memoirs which he has written in the form of essays is that he is challenging the expectation of disabled people, which is to tell an inspirational story by sharing a very unflinching, honest account of living with a chronic illness on a daily basis. So congratulations on that, Abhishek. And you don't lose sight of, humor, lightness, and which is a question I'm going to ask you about how you bring in humor and also the poetry that is there in every chapter. So let's start at the beginning. So your book has chapters which were published as essays. Uh, um, when did you, at what point did you decide to compile it into a memoir? And if some of the essays were published, did you make any changes? How did you kind of weave all of that into a coherent narrative?
I think when thought about the grammar of the body or the book, when I thought about it for the first time, I thought about it as an extension of whatever work I have done over the last 5 years. So, of course, the essays, and I also think in a book form, I also thought in a book form, maybe the essays would gain more primacy in terms of it would more make sense to people, because you open a magazine and you look at an essay and you find things you can relate to, and it might not be an immersive experience for people. So in fact, some of the essays which resonated most were not focused on disability but loneliness, solitude, things like that, which are central to my life, but they're also something which people can relate to. So when I started thinking about the book, I started thinking about can I tell life story, at least the story of how I have lived with chronic illness and disability throughout these years. Will it make sense for the reader, and will it read as a coherent thing? And I actually started also writing essays which would make it an experience where people who actually, there are lots of facets which I had not written before. For example, I had not written about certification. I had written, like, I've given interviews about certification, but never written my narrative of what it is to go and get a certificate as a disabled person in India. And while I was not interested in putting out a policy narrative, I was interested in looking at myself and the doubts I had myself while I was getting a certificate, the questions of being a beneficiary in the state, and my own class privilege, my own notion of able-bodiedness, which we are all born with. I think there's a sense of there's still a part of me which is very able-bodied, and there was also constantly also the constant search of an arc, you know. So I think more than being non-inspirational, I wanted to get away from the arc, because when you are looking for an arc, you are always looking for a sense of overcoming, or you are a sense of that you're completing a story. But my story is not complete. It's just days of lived experience. So yeah, so in that sense, I was more focused on just, they are Polaroids of my life, Polaroids and nothing more in that sense. And yet those Polaroids I wanted them to be as naked as possible. I think nakedness is central to how I write anything, even fiction.
So you do mention in the book that you were quite afraid and even ashamed about opening up, your life to readers. Just tell me about the challenges that you faced, while you were penning down these, thoughts, and knowing very well that they will be, available in a book form. And did you ever feel any kind of hope and excitement when you were writing this book?
I wasn't actually, Swati and me were also talking about this, that how do you bring humor? And you also asked. I think you find humor in life when you uh, lose a certain hope, and yet you gain something out of it. When you are not hopeful, the entire hope is a matter of practice for me. So I'm hopeful without the idea that I'm writing something out, it will bring me something. And this I realized much earlier, by the way, because earlier I thought maybe I will write everything, I will be transparent about myself, and maybe I will find love or get laid or do things which other able bodied people do. And that becomes impossible. That doesn't happen actually. No matter how much of your truth you present to the world sees a disabled person, and they will see a disabled person whenever they see you. So the entire idea is always to, um, there is a sense of shame, of course, and there is always a sense of shame. But the same is shame is much more an emotional aspect than a physical aspect. The physical shame is easy to understand. The physical shame is, yeah, I wear a diaper, yeah, I have incontinence, because these are facts of my life. But it's an emotional shame because you know that after knowing all of these things, people are not getting closer to you, they are getting away from you. That is something which will happen. And when you accept that, and it's always a process in the making, but when you accept that internally, then you become liberated in a way, and then you can write about anything.
Something you tussle with a lot over in your book is the fact that you were not told about your condition until very late. So I wanted to know, I mean, what kind of an impact did it have on your journey of acceptance, knowing that you had this condition very late in your life?
I actually have contradictory views, like feelings about this, because I, of course, am very anxious about, and I was very heartbroken that this was a condition which could have been explained it to me, and I could have taken preemptive action. But then I also think, would I have lived the same life if I had not taken episodes of illness as just mere illness and not something of a greater narrative? Again, even in that, I'm trying to escape the greater meta narrative of disablement. And I think it's also because you are so eager to live life, and sometimes you forget. So you basically think that you will lose some weight and you will get back to being an able-bodied person again, and or you will stop. You will have an operation for fistula, and there will be no UTIs. So all of these narratives you build in your head because you think somewhere down the line you will not be disabled. And it happens with most of us disabled people also, because we are trying to constantly escape. We are trying to build imaginary worlds within where most of my disabled friends also long for that idea that one day an able-bodied person will come and save their lives. Yeah, some will come and love them and things like that. So I think it's a natural thing. It's nothing to be ashamed for. And I think within that narrative, I think I got stuck for a long time to make sense of whether I was told. I knew that things were always wrong. Like I was always ill twice a year. But yeah, because there was no perspective in it, I think I thought, this is it. This is how you live life. And when it got worse, I was not prepared to handle it.
Let's talk about the quest for love. From yourself and from others, the word love appears more than 550 times in your book. So I'm wondering that what are your learnings from your journey about love, and what different forms have love like taken in your life?
For most of my life, able-bodied life, I was intellectualizing love. So it was always, what love technically is: hormones, attraction, or whatever. But there came a point when I started to believe in to accept that perhaps there is a politics of love, and the politics of love is much more complicated than what you intellectualize as love. And the politics of love is more deeply about acceptance. So it's not just about being with someone, it's about acceptance. And acceptance sometimes is very difficult, even if you find that one person who is willing to embrace you. And so it becomes, you're almost raging against the society by saying, why don't you love me? And in that sense, love becomes the central aspect of every human being. And for me, definitely it is the core or what I find meaning in. And its centrality also surfaces from the idea that if we were loved, if disabled people in general were loved, we wouldn't have to face this alienation. Of course, in policy framework, we often, say accessibility and things like that, which is fine. But more than anything, we want to be accepted by the world, and we don't feel that way. And that is where our manifestations of yearning for, love comes from. And so yeah, and in my case, I think it was also very complicated because um, I couldn't make sense of, like, people who saw me as a disabled person. People were seeing me as a disabled person much before I was seeing myself as a disabled person, and that clouded their ideas of friendship, love, intimacy, everything with me. So it was only going back in time. A blind friend once asked me, Abhishek, do you think people saw you as an able-bodied back in college or test? I said, yeah, we never had this conversation. And I went back and had a conversation with a disabled friend who was at this. She said, yeah, but we never had a conversation about it. We thought we are just disabled. And it's a very funny thing, because when I went for the interview, one of the professors there told me, why haven't you applied for under the PWD quota? And I was like, why the fuck I should? I don't think I should. And yeah, and this is so you go back and revisit it again, and you think about it again, and then you realize that maybe the world was not the way you saw it to be, and it's a very destructive thing because it's breaks you from inside, and that's why you find things which can pull you together. And love is primarily an emotion which builds you, even if it's not external, even if it's just you loving yourself or your body. It can carry you through a lot of shit.
So Abhishek, you've written very effectively and evocatively about the physical aspect of your condition. But if one were to read your memoir very carefully, I think mental health, your struggles with mental health, they are suffused throughout the narrative. So I just wanted to know about the dynamics that mental health had to play, that they play in the memoir.
I think every disabled person or ill person struggles with mental health. And what happens is the mental health is worse when you are recovering. I've written about this also because, when you are recovering, you are full of hope. You think you will get back to life. You will get back to living again. And yet your body is never the same again. And in this last 5 years, even before COVID, I had one kidney infection, after which I was bedridden for 2 months. And I had to learn how to walk again. And, so when I was recovering, I was thinking, we'll get back to it again. My cousins are getting married, and this is a packed day and all of that shit. And I went to all those weddings as a disabled person on a wheelchair. And it was a very strange thing, It's a very strange thing because you haven't imagined it in your head, and it's very depressing, It's very depressing because you feel so alone that you can't even complain about it, because people will just come to you and say, oh, this happens. Every able-bodied person you will talk to about disability, everyone has problems. But no, my my disability is not a problem. Yeah, it's something I live with, and it's a very different thing from having a problem that I have to overcome. Again, there's no sense of overcoming. The book is not. I've not overcome anything. I've just written a book, and it doesn't mean. Of course, as a creative person, it means something to me. But as a human being, it doesn't mean anything. It means just that I have a lived experience which I wrote about. That's it.
Which is what is so remarkable about your book, because you mentioned there's a line in the book: you fall, you crawl, and then you walk. And normally it is this getting back, which is often talked about, perhaps even romanticized as inspirational literature. But you have written about crawling.
All my jeans have this mark because I have not been wearing jeans for the last 4 or 5 years, but now I'm back to wearing a jeans, and all of them have this mark because I fall constantly. And now I don't fall because I know my limitations of my body. But when my legs started deteriorating, I was living in Khidki extension, and I used to go to get groceries and fall, and falling became an everyday act for me. And um, and there was no overcoming, there was no getting up on your own and coming back. There was no heroism in it. There was a sense of shame at first, and then it was just a part of your life. But no one acknowledges how hard it is to. And I had this instance when I was living in Vasundhara Enclave, where there was a jam, and the taxi driver told me to get out of the cab. And so it was almost 100 meters away from my home, and started walking. I didn't realize, and there was a ditch in which I fell. And and I had my hand stretched and asking for help, and it was almost dark, and no one came to help. So I crawled to the nearest wall and brought myself up on my feet, and just walked. I didn't do anything. I went home and cried about it, of course, because it's such a traumatic event sometimes. But it's not a traumatic event as it happens. It's always a traumatic event when you are retrospectively thinking about it. Because people fall. There are people who won't help. That's fine. I think it happens when you build that narrative, and you're constantly building that narrative of a disabled person being helpless on the road. And it happens with all of us, but it happens with disabled people more than anyone, because it's not a once in a lifetime event. It happens so often.
I, I want to talk about your different kinds of writing that you've done over the years, be it poetry, both in English and Hindi, your articles, columns, and even the unfinished or unpublished novel, which is that you have, which is very different from this book. How have they kind of informed the writing of your memoir? I also wanted to ask you about the liberal use of or doses of poetry in your book. In fact, there are poems in every chapter. I want to know the rationale behind placing poems in certain sections, and also how does that poetry enhance the the understanding of the story.
Yeah. So yeah, the unfinished novel, which is not unfinished actually, it was a bad novel.
Was it? Is it for the romance novel, right?
Yeah, it was the Bottle of Spring. I think I wrote it because as a writing school, I hadn't written anything. I hadn't written anything in English. I was not able to even write good poems in English back in time. So I taught myself how to write. I was anyways depressed, being disabled and working from home. So I thought, why not write a book? Like, try to write a book. And so I wrote about love, and wrote about heroism and revolution and things like that. And I wrote it thrice, I think, from different perspectives. So it also shaped my way of how to approach narrative, how to write about in first person, third person. And so it was almost in retrospective, it was a very useful writing exercise, because it also helped my poetry. It also helped everything. Poetry I've been doing as a coping mechanism ever since I was 6. I used to write Hindi poems, very sad Hindi poems, basically because it's a very good form of self-pity. And I think poetry works that way beautifully. It heals you somewhere. And but poetry also became a form of activism at some point in life, because I used to go out and perform spoken word poetry. And it's a very elitist, snobbish space, but I used to love the idea that there are people out there who are going to hear a poem or meet a person with disability for the first time, maybe. So it was a good challenge. But also, poetry is very organic for me. It's like, I will tell you an instance which will explain my love for poetry. Uh, I was in AIMS when I was dying with COVID, and for 3 days I was completely out. And so when I recovered, and they shifted me to the lesser, dangerous ICU, I was still in ICU, but I woke up and wrote a poem about it. I wrote a poem because a poem is a source of hope for me. It's like, okay, I'm getting it together. I'm getting back to life. And I just 3 days before that, I had left a message for my loved ones that I'm going bye bye. So it's a poem is a beautiful thing, and you don't need to give anything back to a poem. Just write it, and it is there for you. It doesn't demand anything. if you are not too keen on it being a great work of art, it is the most soothing thing for you. And that's why it's always an extension of whatever I am writing. And if I write fiction, of course I have to write poems for myself. I will be writing poems for myself. And there have been times where I have written poems just because I couldn't sleep, just because I couldn't live everyday life normally. I was ill, I was recovering. So there's a poem for everything. And I started adding them to my pieces because I think poems bring a lot of depth to whatever I am saying. I think much more than, there's a lot of poetry also in my prose, but that is often misread as just prose. But I think when you put it out as just poetry, then people also, because poems don't sell, it's a very good way to sell poems.
Publishers don't want to publish poetry.
Yeah. So it's a good way to publish
will
poems.
sell only if publishers publish poetry. That's a different conversation.
Yeah.
Tell us about your publishing journey, and I mean, did you face any like resistance, opposition from publishing houses? And I'm also very intrigued by the title of the book. So, I mean, who came up with this title? Was it a collaborative like choice?
So basically, it was very organic, which sounds ridiculous when I hear stories of publishing. It was like I'm writing essays, and one day my friend Nisha Susan tells me, Abhishek, do you want to? So I told her I have a manuscript. Like she says, do you want to talk to my agent? Let me connect to you. She connects me to Jaya, and I write to her. And Jaya, apparently she doesn't reply in a, like, she takes time to reply. But on the same day, Jaya writes to me and says, I'm in tears, I'm reading your work, and all of that. It was very organic. And then we worked on the manuscript, and then for 1.5 years I heard nothing actually. So it was completely, and I also, like, because I was living in Darbhanga at that point in time with my parents. I was not doing very well, so I was not even dreaming up this book thing. I said, okay, we have done something, that's fine. So, and then one day she said someone in Penguin is interested, Chirag, and Chirag had read the book, manuscript somewhere, and then but yeah, apparently the book was also rejected in several places, or not, given good, whatever. I was not interested in that, because I was like, I've written whatever I could. I don't think I can do a better job with this book in itself. There's no writing which will change the story, or there's nothing. I put out everything. I put out myself. So I was very relaxed about it. I was, of course, I'm a pessimist, so I always think if maybe it will not get published, and that's fine. So, but when Chirag, when Chirag offered the publication, then it was good, and it was a smooth process. The book's name comes from a poem of mine. So the grammar of my body is actually, there is a Hindi poem which I used to perform, especially when I used to perform for disabled people, because a lot of disabled people were Hindi speaking. JNU mein I used to perform a lot, and it was called Sharir Ka Vyakran. मेरे शरीर का व्याकरण अलग है, गलत नहीं है, something on that lines. So, and then I also started making it part of my English pieces, grammar of my body. So that's where it came from. I thought it was an organic extension of whatever work I have been doing, the grammar of my body. And the Hindi poem is much better, but a Hindi publication, we all know what happens. But yeah, I think it was completely organic that way. I think we also, like, I was invested in the process. I was invested in the cover. I was invested in the name, because I don't want anything, because it's such a personal, deeply personal thing which I'm putting out. So I definitely don't want something to be very apersonal, or like just random, which happens sometimes. I see book covers which are random, but not that they're not good, but basically it's also like, this is the only time probably I'm writing a memoir. I don't think I will write a memoir again. So or anything to do with myself, hopefully, not unless something very tragic happens.
So your disability has also brought you quite close to the queer community. I just wanted to ask, how have you learned from them? What are your learnings from the community?
I think I'm a queer person, but my queerness is, of course, because queerness is such a wide spectrum. You have to constantly define yourself, which I can't. I can't perform queerness, which is the problem with me. But I completely, queerness is a relief. It's a sense of relief that I don't need to fit in the heteronormative sexual culture. And it came as a big relief because I was trying and trying and trying, and I couldn't fit in. And because in your head you always think, you know, we have Bollywood, we have so many things, and I'm a very romantic person. I love writing romantic poetry. So the idea of finding someone, living with someone was so intrinsic. So queerness changed all that. Being with queer friends, hanging out with them, knowing how queer relationship works, exploring even fetishes, uh, the universe. I explored the universe. I went to every place. I found different queer people. I have very good trans friends. I have very good, not just for performance, but they really changed my life because they, because we are. It was also comfort to be in. It was comforting to be with people who are also fucked up, in some sense of the word, in terms of relationships and everything. So it's a beautiful thing. I think in that sense, it's a great comforting thing to be a queer person, despite, of course, there are multiple levels to it being a disabled person, but it is largely as an idea, as not fitting into the heteronormative norm, not fitting into any kind of norm is became the became a form of practice with me, and still is, and everything is an extension of that.
So you are just one book old, and you've already started, uh, you know, paying back to the community. You have, joined forces with South Asia Speaks Fellowship, and you have been mentoring, writers with disability. Can you shed more light on this aspect?
I'm not paying back or anything. I was running a website called Islang for a long time, where I was trying to publish narratives of disabled and chronically ill people. Most of the takers were chronically ill because they don't have the recognition or the, medium. So it was very interesting, so when South Asia Speaks, proposed that we run a program for disabled persons, and chronically ill persons. I think that was a great opportunity for me because I've been trying to build something with this slang, which I couldn't because in the world of social media, if you don't perform a lot of things, you don't get noticed. And with a big name like South Asia Speaks, you, of course, a lot of people who weren't interested in writing those narratives might be interested, and that's a very exciting thing for me because I don't want, I know there are going to be some books, some very good books on disability out next year or the year later, but I want this to be a culture, part of a culture, not just symbolism that some disabled person is writing. Of course the narratives can differ, but I also want disabled people to write with much more truth in their writing. And what I mean, truth is very subjective, of course, but the truth which they live every day, and not the truth which they want to project onto the society.
So you mentioned in your book that that it's not just the disabled people who should adapt to the world, but the world that must also adapt to the disabled. What are some ways in which they can do that?
I go around, if I go around asking people, are you an ableist? No one will accept that they are an ableist because it's such a demeaning thing. People will think they are good human beings, and to say that they are able-bodied, they are ableist, hurts them so much. But has anyone ever thought that if I have my session in this room and the other session in the room below, I won't be able to climb stairs, so I have to go all the back to the lobby and take the lift there. It's a very simple thing, But can I, if I do the constant, accusatory tone, of course everyone will be offended and no one will call me next time. But it's a very basic thing. It's not even their fault. It's just that people don't think about it. People don't think about the ableism which is out there, and that is the biggest thing one can do is talk to disabled people, listen to them, be friends with them, think about you. I think people on social media these days think a lot about, at least performatively, even if so, think a lot about caste privilege, gender privilege, and all of that. Think about disability privilege also. More organizations should at least mention disability when they're saying we give, preference to marginalized background. Because in their imaginarium, a disabled person doesn't even exist, and that's a sad reality we are at. So that should change, and it's okay. We don't need to. I think the idea of ability, or able-bodied privilege should be a bridge. It's not hostility. It should not be used to bring others down, which happens in this social media world. It should act as a bridge, because you understand your privilege, you understand someone's disprivilege, and you talk to each other to build a bridge. And you find ways of talking, you find ways of accommodating, you find ways of doing things. And that is what I want from the able-bodied world, that there should be bridges. Let's talk more about disability and more disabled people everywhere.
Okay, I'll ask one final question and then I would like you to read from the book and then we can ask the audience for some questions that they have. We have 5-10 minutes. So, I'm quoting from the book. My disability, I'm informed, is 57%. What does that mean in real life? Quote unquote. Now, this is only one snippet from your essay collection where you're grappling with the question of uh, what is normal. Uh, have you found any answers?
Yeah, actually, now it's more than 80%. But that's a fact. That's a funny thing about Indian certification system of disability and how the state sees disability. It sees it as a medical fact. So when you go in, yes, they see limb defect. Limb defect, that's the term. Limb defect, and that's how I have scoliosis and kyphosis and muscle weakness. And that's how I'm disabled. I'm not disabled because how much I struggle in walking and doing my everyday task, or anyone for that matter. So yeah, that's, I think, the Indian welfare system, which is very beneficiary centric. And I know it's a large democracy, so it's has its necessities, but it's very existential. It makes you feel existential. So there are no answers. Like you every day, a lot of very privileged people don't even get certificates. They don't need to. I got a certificate because I thought this would assert my identity at first, and of course, I then became beneficiary also when I was applying for my MPhil, which is a very humiliating, which is a very humbling process, because it teaches you that you are like, you are a system. You're they have a disability certificate. In your disability certificate, you have to actually mention what beneficiary government schemes you have used. So you have to write, I've got UGC scholarship because of being disabled. And that's a very humbling thing, because no matter how smart you are, how bright you think you are, all of that is, of course, completely because you have no idea of how society works. And it makes you realize a lot of those things are completely artificial. So yeah, 57, 60, it does. And also because if you are below 40%, you don't get any benefits from it's called benchmark disability. So we have a benchmark. There is a bench somewhere. Which is, if you don't fit in the bench, you don't get anything. And it's really sad, because a lot of disabled people these days who are very actively talking about disability will never fit into the benchmark disability or the government standards, because it's very difficult to prove a lot of chronic illnesses and disabilities. So yeah, that way it's just surreal. It is a very Kafkaesque moment for you when you enter that office and someone takes a small hammer and does this to you and tries to see if your limb is working or not. So yeah, it's existential.
I want you to read out that very heartwarming section from the book where this nurse showed a lot of kindness to you. You know this? Where you mentioned that she treated with you a lot of dignity.
Yeah.
And maybe perhaps read one poem from the book.
No, I can read that. Yeah. The Invisible Act of Being. There's a song. The Invisible Act of Being. There's a song, always a song in my head. Then my head starts playing with the idea of rain. The rain is heavy, heaviness steeps in. There's seepage on the walls. Do not build walls around you. You're broken. Broken but beautiful. How beautiful are the withered petals of jasmine, withering in a book, shrinking with the passage of time. Time makes no sense when you shrink from within. I went and did theater to hide from the world, backstage in the darkness. No one would see me. I wouldn't see myself. I wouldn't see my flaws. What a beautiful thing that would be. Never center stage, always in the wings. Never an actor, always away from the praise. Is there something wrong with him? No. He's practicing to be invisible. He's on method number 8, hide from failure. Living in dark rooms doesn't rob you of foresight. You switch on the lights when you realize that. My legs have shrunk over the years. Muscle shapes itself from lower legs. I don't want them to become invisible. That would be awkward. Only 2/3 of my body would be visible. Freak. I would have joined a circus. I was once Santa Claus in school. True event. Can I be the Joker? Not the sad film one or the angry TikTok one, but the Joker of the circus hiding behind paint, invisible. The circuses have all closed down. Every day I think about becoming a troll. It's a popular option with unemployed people. You get to have the face of an egg. You get to use all the angst. All your failures account for something when the world doesn't know who you are. You can hide behind anonymity except for the government and those who pay you. No one will know about you. And you still have to have opinions, get to have opinions, wild opinions or casual ones or abusive ones. Your work profile can be diverse, but the pay is minimal for for all the poison. There, there are only so many snakes I can hide inside me. I shy away from the protest groups, although I'm always part of protests. I raise my voice whenever my conscience pricks me. I always delete. I can always delete that voice later. It's not that I'm as if I'm considered an authority on voices. My skills as an actor are still weak. The world has upgraded to projections while I'm stuck with small magic lantern. Someone please tell Proust he can revisit his childhood in my heart. It's full of forlorn abandonment and longing. But there is still a magic lantern that tells fascinating stories at night. You can hide behind the idea of work, but nothing I do is considered to be work by society. Everyone will see through it. Also, I wanted to be invisible, not alienated. Offices don't make you invisible. You are still expected to meet your deadlines, put in the hours, suck up to people, network. It might end up alienating you as a person. I heard this on some random YouTube video, but if someone asks you, tell them the writer is an authority on Marx. One can always hide behind daily routine. There is a lot of work to be done: cleaning, washing, cooking, procrastination, fantasizing. Lock yourself up in a house and the world will forget that you exist. Sooner or later, out of mind, out of sight, or the other way around, whichever suits you. There is always an inner monologue running in your head, though, which glorifies solitude, which praises your restraint. When you start behaving as if you have become someone great by becoming invisible, you no longer remain invisible. A mirror is always staring back at you. Being invisible should be a state of being peaceful. It should come with no reputation. Maybe it's a spiritual state, but I don't understand spirits anymore. I quit drinking a year ago. What do you think about this joke? Did I make you feel as if your intelligence doesn't matter? Good. Then you are on your way to wisdom. When you get there, please write to me. Send it anywhere. I will be invisible by then. Every day I do yoga to become invisible. But whenever I culminate the act, I wonder when I will reach the stage when I can do a headstand and put it up as an Instagram story. I don't want to tell the entire world that I can do a headstand, just 120 people that I want to impress. Often I delete social media. I delete myself. But I have no intention of being anonymous. I just want to be invisible. I'm still learning how that is possible. Please write to me if you have found out. Just send a blank postcard. I will know it is from a person who has learned to attain invisibility. This was not what you asked, but
I know. I was like, "Where's the nurse?" Yeah, but it's beautiful. On that note, I'll throw open the floor for audience questions. We have time for two. We have 2-3 questions. Yeah.
Abhishek, it was lovely listening to you. I just wanted to get a sense of when you were writing, was it therapeutic for you in some ways, or was it psychologically, whether it had a negative impact on you? Because to recall certain traumatic moments in your life, to write it back, to write it down, how did that impact you?
yeah, thanks, Radhika. I have written essays which have caused a lot of harm. I have not put them out. And that's the way I realize what to put out and what not to. And in fact, the most painful things to write about are not the body, but people around you. I think that's the most painful thing. The body is, I think it's okay. I think it's also like I didn't write everything at once, so I had to. Most of these actually have been written after episodes of illness and recovery. So I wanted to document almost how it feels. In the first chapter, I was really ill in Delhi and literally had to crawl down the stairs to get to the airport. And I don't know how to process that. Sometimes writing is the only coping mechanism which I have, and perhaps that's why I write poems also. And I stop writing poems I take breaks from writing poems because I think it's a very easy coping mechanism, because you process things so quickly that it almost doesn't seem personal. You just write it like it happened. Okay. So yeah, I think yeah, but if it impacts my mental health in a way that it downward spiral comes, then I definitely don't write it. I don't write it, and I have written, whenever I have written that, I have never put it out, because I know, because putting it out hurts much more than, because you are acknowledging to the world that whatever has happened, and that makes you so vulnerable, much more vulnerable than even documenting illness and bodies fragilities.
No, Abhishek, we and Abhishek know each other for long. No, Abhishek. Okay, he can just say something about our relationship. Abhishek, I was just scrolling our older exchanges, and I came across, you remember, in February 11th, 12th, 2012. Remember, we had a long exchange and I was worried about you. What you sent to me, a lovely longest email, sir, I slept when you pinged me. It was a beautiful poem like beginning of the mail. And then, don't worry, I'm writing always a fiction writer wanting to be with poetry. And there 12 years back, we were talking about that, book, A Spring in a Bottle. So tell me something about, we are also, in a sense, Bihari and Patna. Those days, I remember we used to talk about Patna. So what is the experience of Patna, about visibility, invisibility from Patna to Darbhanga is something, it's a land, and the perception of the land and the language.
Yeah.
And the Maithili touch, I don't know anyone sitting here is aware of the Maithili lyric touch in Abhishek's,
I think
language.
I think what disability is a very complicated thing, but it's very simple in small towns and places like Patna. It makes you invisible completely, because there is so much of cultural effort put around birth, death, and marriage. I think disability disappears somehow. And I've written a chapter about this called Hopscotch, where I tried to be nostalgic. And when I was trying to be nostalgic, I felt that the only thing, big difference is that I can't even get out of my house, because there is so much staring going around in the streets of Patna and Darbhanga. So the body like mine is an alien body. And even in Patna, when I live now, I often say I live in my flat. I don't live in the city because the city is useless for me. I can't go to a restaurant and just have a meal without it causing me some kind of form of trauma. And but that's part of, I think, living in India. Most disabled people face that. So I think being part of a collective identity brings a lot of relief in that sense.
We have done. But thank you so much for this wonderful conversation. Please get a copy of his book. It's it's doing very well apparently according to Sohini. She's the Nielsen for this book at Kalinga. Yeah. No. I was just saying that. Just telling the reader.
Yes, and get it signed.
Yeah. For us.
No, for the
Yeah, we have.
We have.
So let's take some formal picture.
Cool.
Yeah, we can sit. This will be fine.
Cool.
Extremely grateful for having you both in the stage. A lot to learn and learning a lot. I request you all to please be seated because we have one more session remaining.